No, I am the most powerful. I will destroy you. No, I will use my magnetic power. It's too much. We have to have someone else. Okay, here I am. No, it's not happening. We can't get him to stop. Oh my god, we need someone else. Hi, it's the Baldy from the Beardy and the Baldy. Funny to see you here. Welcome to the Baldy's thoughts on X-Men Apocalypse. Been wanting to get to this most of this week, to be honest, and I had time here and there, and I was working on videos. Wasn't meshing up quite right, so this is my let's go for the gold on this one take of this review. And wanted to have Jesse do it with me, but unfortunately, just with schedules and timing and whatnot this week, it just turned into, I warned him, I'm gonna throw my 2 cents out there and just see what happens. So, X-Men Apocalypse. So let's talk about that. Jesse and I got to see it last Thursday night, so it's been a week, and in that time of letting it like digest and soak in, I didn't really even think too much about it, to be honest. I'm gonna warn you, I am one of those people that I grew up with X-Men. Jesse and I both did. That was one of our things when we were like 12, 13-year-old. We started bonding over that, and it became like our hardcore obsession. X-Men books and Uncanny X-Men, X-Men, X-Force, X-Factor, and whatnot. And they were like our gateway drug to all the other comics that started coming out that interested us back in 1991. So in that time, I really grew to enjoy a lot of the mythology of the comics and whatnot. I started reading them when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, right around when the first Secret Wars came out in comics back in the 80s. Because they showed up in Secret War, they actually piqued my interest. I'm like, dude, Colossus is cool, and what's the deal with these guys? I started picking up the comics. Next thing you know, it's like, I'm sold. These guys are great. The X-Men movie franchise for me is one of those things where I feel like the movies have been a product of their time. And by what I mean by that, up until the first X-Men hit in 2000, there wasn't really a precedent for comic book movies like there is today. You had some hits, like you had, back in the 70s and the early 80s, you had the Superman movies, which, the first two of that were great. You had 89 Batman and Batman Returns then in 92. Blade came out, but there wasn't like a definitive comic book movie. This is, comic book and geek culture the way that there is today. So looking back at that time, it's like, yeah, it makes sense. Fox got the rights to X-Men, which for me at the time, mind-blowing. Just the fact that I was going to get to see these characters translated from the comic page to the screen. There's a guilty pleasure side of the first and the second movies for me where it was just awesome to know that I was actually getting X-Men movies. And honestly, even the third one to an extent. Hate that as you will. That's fine. The third movie at least gave me a Colossus, and that was one of the saving graces. Plus, Kelsey Grammer as Beast for me was like, that was who I was hoping they'd get. So it was cool that they got him in the part. Plus, Colossus had a lot more screen time, and I don't know. It has its charms for as much as people give it a lot of crap. I don't look at it as it's the worst thing ever, I guess. I look at it as it's not the greatest of the movies, but I appreciate that they had the hint at the Sentinels. I appreciated that they did the attempt at the fastball special. Colossus, like I said, who's my favorite X-Man of all time. And Beast, Kelsey Grammer Beast. Other than that, the rest of it was what it was. But tangent aside, there wasn't a precedent for these movies. And basically, I think The Matrix was the closest to a precedent that people were looking at. And even before that, the Batman 89 Tim Burton Batman, because basically, yeah, everybody in the heroes, they have to wear black. And that for me was very lame. Like I remember even seeing the initial photos of that stuff on it wasn't even online. I almost said online. It was in like Wizard magazine probably and stuff like that, like Entertainment Weekly and whatnot. And when I saw the photos of them in costume, I thought, well, shit, this isn't what I signed up for. I mean, I'd like to see them more in maybe the blue and yellow costumes at least, but we got black with hints of the colors that they normally should have, which for me was eye-rolling, because I'm like, if you're gonna do it, just do it. Don't do that little crap and make me think that that's how you're gonna appease me as a longtime fan. But getting back to the whole point, no real template or no real like comic book movie inferno like it is today. The wealth of riches that we have in 2016 alone is amazing, because we had 3 in scale huge movies hit this summer, all of which were movies that, if you would have talked to me about it when the first X-Men movie hit and say, you're going to have not only X-Men 1, 2, 3, 2 solo Wolverine movies, a reboot X-Men movie where it shows them in the 60s, a movie after that of them in the 70s, and now this one in the 80s where they actually get to fight Apocalypse, I would have just been sitting there going, what? Well, fast forward 16 years, and I gotta admit, I'm very mediocre about this movie. It's not one that I need to see again. It's not on the level of Batman versus Superman, though. It's not on that, oh dear God, if I ever sit through this again, I'm gonna have a nosebleed and my head will explode, and I will turn into Professor X from X3 and just atomize myself so I don't have to be in the room dealing with this ever again. It's not that at all. To me, it was just basically mediocre. All of the movies this summer that were comic book related movies had so much stuff in them. They were packed beyond the brim for every single one of these movies. Some of which didn't need to go even that far. And other ones where it met the brim, it might have overflowed just a little bit, but it overflowed in a way where you had joy because of it. And if you are keeping track of our reviews, you kind of know which ones I'm talking about by just linear time here of what came first, what came second. And this one, it just packed a bunch of useless stuff all together, and I felt kind of like, okay, like I didn't realize we needed all of this put into one movie for the X-Men. And I thought the whole purpose of the franchise was kind of going back to basics, and instead we went back to basics in First Class, and now we're going, each new movie is another decade added on to the year of the franchise, or the years of the franchise. I don't personally care about that. I mean, the only thing that you can really do if you're doing that kind of mentality is you're doing like a greatest hits of what happened in those eras. And even then, I'm not saying that it's right, because the thing I'm trying to say about the X-Men franchise ever since it started, and the whole idea of it not being like the superhero climate there is today, is superhero movies were still kind of looked at as like the bubble gum of movies. People just were like, okay, haha, that was fun, let's move along. I think they were looked at as things to appease kids and teenagers more than it was audiences where adults were going to sit in the seats, because at that point, a lot of the generation that now have turned this into the phenomenon that it is, we weren't at that point yet. We were in our probably very early 20s, even late teens, or even mid-teens, or maybe even mid-20s. We weren't even at that level where we could really push our opinions the way that it is, and speak with our money the way that it is today. So what Fox gave us as X-Men fans was, here is the cherry picking version of the mythology, because there's, up to that point, there was about 40 years worth of mythology, 50 years worth of mythology in the comic books alone. I didn't enjoy that from the first movie, and it's something that still is driving me nuts leading into these new movies. They're still cherry picking. They're still they're making characters that don't have certain powers have powers just randomly. They are shoehorning powers into characters when the power is something that isn't a part of their own mutant ability. It's something that may be an exterior factor, or an external factor. No pun intended with the X's there. But it's not showing the version of these characters that I love from the comics quite in the way. It's more of a sci-fi version of what the X-Men are, based on Bryan Singer's take on the characters. And a little side note that drives me crazy every time I remember this, I heard stories in the media. I know Hugh Jackman was one that he basically let you know Bryan Singer's mentality about X-Men as a source material, that when they filmed the first couple movies, he wouldn't allow comic books on the set at all. He basically said the script is your Bible and that's it. You are not to go into the comics at all and read what these characters are. The script is the only thing that you got. For me, that is, like you're hamstringing yourself from the get-go. You're not informing the actors very well, because the script wasn't even that great of a script for the first X-Men movie. If you rewatch that again, it's more of a nostalgia piece, and the fact that, hey, we got X-Men. But then when you actually see what they do with the X-Men, you're like, oh. I mean, you got your bright moments. You got Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart, which to me was just, I love the fact that they got him in that role. Ian McKellen as Magneto wasn't who I saw as Magneto. In my head, I always had like Rutger Hauer for some reason. Probably that like big splash 2-page spread in X-Men #1 where he does the "I am Magneto" part, and he's like ripped and long hair, and he just has that like warriorness about him that I think Rutger Hauer has a bit more of that vibe to him than Ian McKellen. But Ian McKellen playing against Xavier by Patrick Stewart, brilliant. I mean, that was always fun and a treat to watch. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine was amazing to watch for me, because I never knew of the actor Hugh Jackman until that movie. But yeah, there is a part of me that's sad that they can't find a 5'3" actor, or at least a smaller actor, to be this little crazy furball of violence that Wolverine should be, at least in my mind. It was more of the women swoon and all that kind of version of them, and it's like, all right, I get it. They're trying to make it more accessible, I guess, rather than having this kind of caveman guy running around doing his shtick. But for me, there's certain things from the comics that just embrace them. Don't change them just because you're afraid that people aren't going to accept it. Maybe they will. You never know. But anyway, that's the version we got. So now, going into this new movie after so much freaking buildup of me ranting about these movies to this point. So you got Apocalypse. Apocalypse is not a villain that I normally give much of a crap about, to be honest. He's he's one of those villains who he's like this maniacal in the background villain for me in the X-Men, where he's almost like the hand-wringing kind of guy where, you know, survival of the fittest and blah, 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 blah. And, I mean, his big claim to fame, probably two things. So, biggest claims to fame. He created Archangel and turned Angel, who was a character that wasn't really, you know, amazing by fan standards, I think, into this, like, the beginning of the 90s where the, you know, the characters had to be a little more of the anti-hero and whatnot. It was kind of the beginnings of that going forward with some of these characters. Him creating Archangel as he was the Horseman Death for his Horseman of the Apocalypse. And that was, when you saw that in the comics, you're just sitting there going like, holy crap, you know, like he can do that to people. That was cool. But the only other thing they really did that was interesting probably was the Age of Apocalypse storyline, that they shut down all the X-Men books for, I forget if it was like almost a half a year back in the mid-90s, and they did this whole storyline that Xavier was dead, Magneto was now in the lead of the X-Men, and they were head-to-head against Apocalypse and his guys, who were turning the world into this like Hitler state. And a lot of people look back on that with fond memories, and I do. I loved a lot of those concepts. But it was more the timeline change that was interesting than Apocalypse himself, once again. In the new movie, you got Oscar Isaac, and he did the best he could with the material given, and you know, I felt like, you know, he other than saying he did the best he could, I mean, he really wasn't a very memorable villain though, and I can't figure out it. I don't think it was his acting. I just think it was the way it was written. He's the sort of villain where one minute he's really quiet and the next minute he's screaming, and sometimes he's screaming and they, for lack of a better term, they auto-tune his voice. And that for me just is like, it doesn't interest me really, and they aren't really 100% on what he does, to be honest. Like they say, well, he's an ancient god, and they show in the beginning of the movie this really crazy sequence where I guess he subjugated Egypt and stuff, so there's an uprising against him, and they have this like chutes and ladders crazy thing of some of the blocks of pyramids are going, and they're doing this giant like Space Mountain maze thing to try to crush Apocalypse getting a new body and like upgrading himself because his old body is finally weak and dying and all this other stuff. And also Oscar Isaac's character before that, I think he was a mutant, and he was gifted with a healing factor, so it made it possible that Apocalypse could constantly just be young and not get hurt easily and whatnot. But they have this whole chutes and ladders sequence craziness of the giant blocks and the bricks for the pyramids are falling, and his four horsemen are trying to defend the place where they're doing the body transfer and all this stuff. And it's like that sequence was me just kind of going, okay, you know, like I don't know any of these characters. Nothing about this is really like making me go, oh my god, this is important. It's more like this is just setting up the character. Then you go to the 1980s, you don't go to present day. And you have the X-Men and whatnot, and you have Magneto, who is trying to start a new life. He's got a wife and a child since the last movie. And, you know, Magneto being Magneto and his luck being his luck, his wife and child unfortunately get killed accidentally after people that Magneto works with. He's trying to be a normal guy, and he's like working at a steel plant or something, and he actually saves somebody's life when like this vat is about to fall on them, this big giant metal vat, and he like stops it and throws it away at least to make the guy safe. And the way they repay him is then, oh hey, guess what? You were the guy that did the uprising in the 70s in the last movie, and we're gonna bring you in. But they accidentally end up killing his daughter and his wife, which makes him turn back into, well, now I'm gonna kill everybody because F all y'all, Magneto. So that for me was like, well, I saw that coming from about, like even without the previews, you flat out knew Magneto is going to be Magneto. If you don't have him be Magneto, you're just flat out you're going to lose a very key component to why the X-Men franchise works. Not only will you be losing that, you're also going to be completely undermining and destroying one of the greatest villains that Marvel's ever created, as far as I'm concerned. He, if you think of his ideology, it's hard. If you were a mutant, if you put yourself in the mutant shoes and you got to hear what he had to say, and you also knew the fact that he went through the Holocaust, he got to see the worst of humanity, and he is someone who actually has abilities that make him better in his mind than humanity, of course he's going to want to feel he's superior to all of us, which is part of why the X-Men 1 deal with him and his giant master plan of I'm going to turn humanity into mutants was the most stupid plot line they've ever put him in. I'm sorry, it just is. It's such a horrible mishandled thing, and that was like the worst aspect of that movie for me. Like, there's a lot of other things that they cherry picked and they did how they wanted to do it for the movie, which I kind of forgave it. But when that is your main villain's motivation, when the villain himself would have probably listened to that plan and gone, I'm not doing that. Are you freaking kidding me? I'm a mutant. I was born this way. People should not have to become this way in order to be better. They just should be who they are. And if they are Homo sapien, they are always going to be less than the Homo superior of the mutants. That's how he is. That's how his mind, his methodology, everything. That's how he works. Hands down, wrong plot. Oh my God, I hate that so much. This movie, though, you got Michael Fassbender, who actually he's giving a great performance in this one. He has yet to give a bad performance in these as Magneto. He is an amazing find to be the young Magneto, and he's fun to watch in all these movies because there is a lot going on. Like, if you watch his performance, there's always something going on underneath the surface in the way he does things, and I do appreciate that. I do think the whole thing between him and James McAvoy, Professor X, is now running its course, because it's really gotten to the point where the scenes that were the most interesting with Magneto and Professor X from the first X-Men movies now have kind of become these almost like and then they freeze frame, kind of like the old 70s TV shows. They aren't fulfilling me in that way anymore. It's almost like you're just regressing and you're always going back to the same things. In this one, they even go to the whole, what are you going to do when someone tries to, come into your school and take everyone in the middle of the night? And I have a great soul of pity for the man who comes looking for trouble at my school. Lines from, if I remember right, that's the first X-Men movie ever. And it was cool in that one. But in this one, there's a certain amount of like, okay, I don't know. When people reference stuff like that, it really does bother me when it's not even done in a good way, I guess. Anyway, getting back to it. Yeah, Fassbender, he was great. James McAvoy, I liked him. It's fun to see a less serious side of Professor X, because with Patrick Stewart, there was always that, like, it was basically kind of like Captain Picard in a wheelchair. McAvoy brings this youthful exuberance and his like his he wants to be a ladies' man, and it's kind of fun to see Professor X played in a way where he's not being serious all the time in that way. So I can appreciate that. That was a nice touch. The whole thing with him and Moira McTaggart was definitely amusing to watch, and there was a lot of charm there too. And he's got some good lines, like when they meet Cyclops and he has Cyclops show off his abilities and he shoots a tree out in on the grounds of the mansion, and the tree goes up in flames. He's like, well, that was my favorite tree, and you know, stuff like that. He's got these like cutesy little moments at least. So yeah, I enjoy him for the most part. To me, both of those actors are very much on par with the way that Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen were playing them. So it's fun to see them. Like, you see the beginnings of them moving forward and whatnot. I think that was a great casting choice. You get all the other X-Men coming back as well, along with actually new recruits, or rebooted recruits, I guess you could call them. You have Jennifer Lawrence coming back as Mystique, who for me, it was like, I don't judge it nearly on the same scale as other people. She was okay. I didn't find her to be amazing. I didn't find her to be as lackluster as other people. I just felt like she just kind of did her thing, and you know, but there was a weirdness to me of, okay, up until the last movie there was that whole mutant and proud thing, and now in this one I think there was only 2 or 3 sequences where she was in blue. So I felt like that was kind of shooting the character in the foot, I guess, because it felt like she wasn't really interested in being mutant and proud as much as she was previously. Nicholas Hoult as Beast, I like him. Here's something that's weird to me though. So okay, at this point we're 20 years removed from X-Men First Class. How is it that everybody who was in that movie, we're talking Havoc, we're talking Beast, we're talking Jennifer Lawrence, we're talking Michael Fassbender, and we're talking James McAvoy and Rose Byrne as Moira McTaggart. How are they still the same age they were 20 years before? I don't look anything like I did when I was in high school, and I'm probably not going to look like this when I'm 20 years older than this. So I'm a little lost in how that works. They don't look like they've aged at all. It feels like there's no progression from that. It was basically they just got them back together and just said, trust us, it's 10 years later. We're going to show Return of the Jedi in this one. They're alluding to stuff like that. And for me, and the Eurythmics are going to play in this. And for me, it's a little like I'm scratching my head going, okay, suspension of disbelief is one thing, but this is just not, no. I mean, there's nothing about this to make me feel like these characters have aged into the characters that we're going to know, or at least have seen previously. So anyway, the story is convoluted, just kind of like this review at this point, because I keep tangenting. The story, though, it's not the most engaging story at all. It's basically things happen. And for me, at least, you know, it's like there's so much stuff going on. There's so many characters they're trying to introduce. There's so many characters they're trying to reestablish. They're reestablishing Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Angel, Jean Grey, and they also bring in the new Storm, and then they also bring in Psylocke in this one, who she's probably got the short shrift of the screen time out of all of the horsemen that Apocalypse gathers around him. She's kind of the silent and deadly character out of the group. She does have a few lines, but basically, I didn't really personally feel one way or the other about her or any of them. I thought the new Storm was decent. but it was weird that they changed her hair color because of Apocalypse amping up her abilities. But they did at least show her in Cairo, and they did at least have her as a thief, which that was part of her history in the comics. I gave you cred for that. The new X-Men themselves, the rebooted X-Men, you have Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, you have Sophie Turner as Jean Grey, and Cody Smith McPhee as Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler won me over. Nightcrawler for me this was the Nightcrawler I've been waiting to see ever since they said he was going to be in X2, and he was okay. But this version of Nightcrawler, I felt like this is the version of Kurt that was the most like how this is the comic book one. Now, granted, I would have liked to personally have seen the actual like the group of X-Men who were in the 80s as the team, instead of you're shoehorning and cherry picking again from the stories. So you have Cyclops joining the team when Nightcrawler joins the team, when Jean Grey is still young, and it's like that happened in the 60s in the comics, and in the movie continuity, you're having characters who didn't even start out as X-Men So whatever. I mean, for a fan of the movie, for a fan of the comics, you're gonna either have to love it or hate it for what changes it makes. And these are liberties that, to me, I'm like, I don't really see a rhyme or reason why you're doing what you're doing with these characters and why you're setting them up in the way that you're doing. I just feel like it's Bryan Singer going, well, these are the ones I want to focus on because there's realism. Because I remember hearing somewhere he was more interested in the realism of the powers and how they could be worked into science more than he was worried about much else, and trying to make it a little more legit than just having, you know, somebody who can, I don't know, somebody who can just shoot like blasts from their hands or something, compared to Storm having the weather power. So there was elements involved in that, and the weather is involved in that. The psychic ability thing he used, which was fine. The healing ability with Wolverine and whatnot. The magnetic stuff, because there is the, you know, there's those things about it, I guess. But there's a part of me going, yeah, this is really what I wanted to see, is the realistic version of somebody's idea of what the X-Men are. What's funny though is the previous movies that Singer has directed, he isn't really an action director. He's somebody that he sets up action sequences, but they just kind of like happen eventually. This is the one where you can just tell he just threw everything at the screen. That's why he interrupted me earlier, to be honest. One of the things that I was saying to Jesse the moment the movie was over was it felt a lot like when I would play with my toys when I was younger, I always had to have a storyline, and there were these moments in the storyline where, in order to boost my drama of the scene or whatever, and yes, I'm that big of a geek that I was worried about these things when I was little, I should say, and he just kept throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks and what made it bigger and badder and more interesting. So, like the ending of this movie, which, yes, I'm already jumping to the ending at this point. No, I'm not going to try to do too many spoilers about the ending for those of you who want to see it. But basically, you have your bad guy. And yeah, he has his 4 horsemen. But basically, the ending is you got the bad guy. And you need to get the bad guy in order to figure out the situation. He's the one causing the most trouble at this point. So you have him. And you have somebody like, say, Magneto. And he's like, I'm going to stop you now because I realized you're wrong, and I'm not going to be your horseman, and I'm going to protect people, and I'm going to fight for the X-Men, and da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, I'm going to stop you. And he starts using his crazy amped up abilities, of course, because that's what Apocalypse does in order to make the fittest survive. So he's doing all this stuff and all this stuff. And Apocalypse is just like, I'm going to stop you, and they're doing their thing. And what he does isn't enough. So what do you got to do? You got to get number 2 out there. Well, here's our boy Cyclops, who gets his moment to shine in this movie. And he starts shooting his optic blast, which I'm amazed this still works after all this time. And he's doing his from behind him. And he turns around and he's like, no, you're going to be part of a wall. And he becomes part of a wall and he can't do much. So then after that, you have someone else come in and they're doing their thing. And he takes him out really quick too. And then you have someone else jump in and, I got you, Bob. And no, it wasn't Wolverine. But still, I'm just trying to demonstrate my point. And they're doing their thing and all this stuff. And then Magneto does his thing. And it's basically then by that point, the thing that amused me the most is you have all that happening. And it felt to me very much like you have, and then this happens, 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 and then this happens. It's like Bryan Singer went nuts. And I was watching the ending just kind of going, make it stop, make it stop, make it stop. Because by the end of the movie, I'm just sitting there going like, I don't even know what to think anymore. I just want this all to just go away and be quiet again. So that was something amusing to me about the ending, at least. It's one of those movies that it doesn't know when to end, and when it does, it goes so over the top with the ending that, number one, if you're an X-Men continuity person, you're just sitting there going, what in the hell is happening here? Number two, if you just like the movies in general, you're probably going to sit there going, okay, and you know what they're setting up next, which, you know, love it or hate it, that's probably what they're going to do with it, because they tried it in X3 and nobody likes it because Brett Ratner. So now it's Bryan Singer's time where he's going to be like, nah, I'm going to do it better than you did. I don't think it's going to be better. I don't think it's going to be worse. I think it's going to be just what this movie did, only it's going to be even bigger, because now the wealth of riches of the superhero movie phenomenon, or the heightened awareness now of superhero movies, has turned this into not necessarily telling the best story or telling stories that are even true to the characters. And in the X-Men franchise in particular, I feel like they only manage to get a few characters right most of the time. And usually they're the ones that, like Xavier, to me, they do pretty well. Magneto, after you get through the first X-Men movie, you at least have Magneto as close as you could possibly get to him. Wolverine's character, for the most part, I feel they do right. But long story short, you're gonna end up probably with the Dark Phoenix saga next. And Dark Phoenix saga isn't about Jean Grey having a part of her that is locked away that she then uses as the Deus Ex Machina moment for the X-Men. It was a cosmic being that chose her. So you already know if she's got that going on and she's like 13, 14 years old in this, it isn't going to be what the fans want it to be, and it's going to end up turning out to probably piss off quite a few people. And in my mind, it's just going to be, well, this is Singer cherry picking the universe once again to create what he wants to do, and it's a sci-fi movie versus it being a superhero movie. So take that as you will, I guess, at this point. But anyway, so positives about the movie. I gotta say, my favorite moment of the entire movie, best positive of the entire movie, was the Quicksilver sequence, which I know there are so many people out there that when they saw Days of Future Past, they thought this is the best thing ever, and sliced bread wasn't nearly as awesome as this. I saw it, and I personally didn't enjoy that sequence nearly as much as other people, partially for the song choice, because when I heard Time in a Bottle start up, I'm like, oh, I hate this song. Why are you making me sit through this in an X-Men movie? I mean, I'd rather sit through You're the Inspiration and Deadpool rather than sit through Time in a Bottle. And that was done in such an awesome way that, yes, please do more of that kind of stuff in the next Deadpool, because, oh my God, their song choices and that killed me. But in the case of Days of Future Past, it was okay. It was a Prison Break moment and whatever. But I personally enjoyed this one way more, because the X-Men themselves don't get to be the heroes half the time in these movies. It's always making them about being misfits, and behind the scenes they're saving the day. But you know, they're watching whatever they did on the news is covering it at the end, and they're like, yeah, we did good. But in the case of how they do Quicksilver in this movie, he is a true hero, and he's somebody that he's smiling while he does it. He's having a great time. The whole sequence where the mansion is just being destroyed, such like I was sitting there just like grinning like an idiot watching that moment. Bryan Singer, he did a great job with that, at least. Quicksilver himself is not the character from the comics that I've known. Quicksilver in the comics is usually a dick, and he's somebody who he's frustrated by life, because the best thing I've ever read to explain how Quicksilver feels about just normal life in general was an X Factor comic book where he's getting like a psychological evaluation, and he explains it as, have you ever been in line to use an ATM and the person in front of you doesn't know how to work it, so you're having to stand there and wait for them to accomplish what they're trying to do, and it's something you could do so quickly if you were only that person in line instead of having to wait for them. And when I read that, it was like the light bulb went off over my head. Like, I love it. That is the coolest way I've ever heard a speedster ever described, and it makes sense that he would be frustrated, and he'd feel elitist, and he would feel just like, you know, everything is driving him crazy because nothing can do it as fast as he can. Whereas in this movie, Evan Peters plays him as such a likable guy, and he's sort of, I wouldn't even call him a reluctant hero. He's just somebody who's kind of like an adrenaline guy that through his actions end up being heroic. And I love it. I honestly, I never thought I'd see the day where I'd say I want to see a Quicksilver movie, but you did it, dude. I'd love to see an Evan Peters Quicksilver movie. I love that sequence. There was a lot of fun in it. The pizza dog in particular, I was definitely laughing a little bit on that part. Another plus was I like that they actually gave Cyclops a lot more screen time, because the poor guy has always gotten the short end of the stick. I enjoyed Ty Sheridan's take on Cyclops for the most part. I felt like, you know, they're making up for what they did to James Marsden in the first three movies, but unfortunately I feel like they still owe him a lot more, because I really felt like James Marsden could have done something with the character if they would have only gotten away from their lust over Wolverine in those movies. Cody Smith-McPhee, the Nightcrawler, I love him. He was great. He was the way I always hoped Nightcrawler would be. It was alright seeing like the astral plane. They have a whole sequence where Xavier and Apocalypse end up doing battle that way, and Xavier's actually like his fully formed self, and he's actually like throwing punches and punching on Apocalypse, and he does the "this is my house, bitch" kind of a line, which that was sort of fun. During the fight with Apocalypse at the end in the real world, I actually thought it was awesome too that they gave Quicksilver a moment where he actually did some damage to Apocalypse, which was something I was like, I didn't see that coming either. So that was pretty sweet. Like I said, New Storm, I liked her. Visually it was fun to see Olivia Munn dressed up like Psylocke. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a guy, it is what it is, but it wasn't the version of Psylocke that I was hoping for. I'd give her another chance in another movie, but I'm also at the point with the X-Men franchise where I wasn't even excited to see this movie, so I don't even know how excited I'd be to see another one at this point. We'll see. Who knows? I mean, some of these movies kind of have run their course for me, and it's really weird to say in this day and age because there are so many good ones coming out, but the X-Men themselves, you could kind of see the seams are showing, and there's a lot of wear on this. I mean, they already had to reboot once, and already it feels like that is something they need to do again after only 3 movies now. And I don't want to see them go back in time again and redo all this stuff and whatnot. To me, it's, you know, maybe try from the ground up like they did with Amazing Spider-Man and see what happens if you go forward. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think these movies are still going to be around because Fox is like going to cling to this for all it's worth because they're afraid that Marvel's going to get back and they're going to lose one of their cash cow franchises. And it's got a lot of goodwill from the fans still. I mean, it still kind of blows my mind that if you like comics, you'll still go see these movies and you'll be like, Bryan Singer's the only guy that should be doing this, because I don't personally feel like his take on the X-Men is anything amazing. I felt, and there's a lot of people out there who they view him as he's supposed to be the guy shepherding these movies, and it's like, okay, but you know, his take on it isn't what I always enjoyed about these comics. I mean, they do a whole bunch of other things than just what they do in these movies. They go to outer space, they fight the Brood, there's all of the Shi'ar Empire stuff going on, there's the Starjammers, there's the Morlocks, there's the Marauders, there's the Reavers out in Australia, there's the Australian team of the X-Men. There's so many different things in this mythology from the comics that they could be doing, and they always come back to the whole thing of it has to be about either the race parallel and the whole civil rights movement, and you know, Martin Luther King as Xavier and Malcolm X as Magneto, or in Singer's case, I think he's put out a lot of also LGBT message in these movies, especially like the coming out scene with Iceman and whatnot. And there, something to put in your mind too. I always understood like directors sometimes will cast actors in movies and they'll have them be almost like a totem of themselves in these movies. I know Inception, they said that about Christopher Nolan casting Leo DiCaprio, and if you look at the two of them, you can kind of see similarities visually between the two. And when you look at the guy who played Iceman in the first X-Men movies, and you look at Bryan Singer, you can't tell me he didn't cast him with the thought of, I'm going to use him to speak the whole my plight of coming out and whatnot to my parents, because I thought Bryan Singer was gay, but I guess he's bisexual or something, and I don't care one way or the other what you are out there, but it's like, you know, there's agendas in filmmaking and there's agendas in storytelling, and I felt like Bryan Singer's big agenda was, I want to tell this side of my life through these characters. And that's all well and good and stuff, but I feel like that message has gotten pushed more to the forefront, and he's worried about more of that sort of message than he is about making like an action comic book movie and whatnot at times. It's like it can still carry a message, but it could also be so much more grand and so much more interesting than maybe what like that is only like a facet of what the X-Men are about. The X-Men also are this like misfit group that they fit together, and you know, they're the outcasts, but they're still trying to do the right thing. That to me is cool too. That fits in with anybody who was ever bullied for just wanting to be a geek, or wanting that maybe they weren't the athletes, or maybe they had talents that nobody knew about, or they were the wallflowers because they just didn't know how to fit in with everybody else, or they were the put upon, the beat up upon, the kids who basically they had enough of getting picked on and they just kind of kept to themselves and stuff. I think that's part of why X-Men spoke to me as a teen and as a kid. And you know, there's other ways of taking it than just the Bryan Singer vision of this, and it's a little interesting too, because he's gotten to direct 4 of these movies now, if I remember right. X-Men, X2, Days of Future Past, and this one. And you can start to see kind of the lack of love start coming through. I'm not trying to be a jerk, and I'm not trying to push whatever it is that I think he's doing out there. But there's a part of me that goes like, okay, I think Bryan Singer is happy that there are people who want him to come back to something, and he's getting a paycheck out of that more than he's worried about actually making something have life and vibrancy again. I felt like Matthew Vaughn kind of proved himself with First Class and said, you know, like, well, if somebody actually wanted to do this seriously and wanted to do it in a way where it's going to be infused with life again, this is a way to do it. And I feel like that was kind of like, that was the high note of the X-Men franchise to this point, not even Days of Future Past. I felt the best thing of Days of Future Past, real quick, is the future moments where you get to see the teams fighting the Sentinels. Everything else, I felt like I just want to watch that stuff, because that wasn't accomplished in any of the X-Men movies to this point, where they all fought as a team against something the way that they did in Days of Future Past. So kudos to you, Bryan Singer, for giving me what I've been waiting for like over a decade with that movie. But I love how it was a bookend in both, you know, the bookend of the beginning and the ending, basically, of, well, that's the future. And those sequences were kind of relegated to, well, we're doing that stuff and that's cool, but the whole rest of the movie is just going to be about Wolverine in the 70s. So it is what it is. Anyway, getting back to this movie, because I've said way too much and, as usual, babbled on. Yeah, I mean, it's showing, it's really sad that after a reboot and one movie since the reboot, it's showing signs of being tired already, in my opinion. Or if it's not that, it's more of a focus issue. There's so much going on in here where by the end of it, I was tired of keeping up with it all. And it wasn't just my mentality going into this movie. It was just, I'm sitting there going, stuff's happening. I don't have a connection to really much in this movie to make me care what happens and who lives, who dies, or whatever. And that's not a good thing to have, necessarily. So, I mean, I went in with that feeling, and the movie never did anything to try to sway that opinion into something better. It made me just feel like, well, this is what I'm getting. One more good thing I would say about it, too, before I went on my tangent, I actually liked, at the end of this movie, you get a Danger Room sequence for the first time, if I remember, or no, second time. And the Danger Room sequence actually showed a majority of the X-Men in costumes that actually resemble something they've worn in the comics for the first time in quite a while. And that was pretty cool. I mean, Storm's outfit was pretty sweet, and I know the Cyclops outfit was very much from 1991 X-Men #1 Cyclops, the Jim Lee design, which it wasn't 100% that, but it made me go like, ah, I see what you're doing here. Negatives that I'd say about the movie real quick. I wasn't really a fan of Sophie Turner's Jean Grey. I didn't feel like she was doing a whole heck of a lot to make me feel... I always felt like Jean is a warm character and friendly, and instead I felt like she was so aloof and like the Ice Queen of the piece, which it was like, didn't do much. The sequence between her and Wolverine when they're in the Alkali Lake facility actually was a nice touch, though, where it kind of shows why Wolverine would have this connection to her and why he'd be attracted to her later on when he meets her, whenever that happens, now that the reboot of the timeline is hit. Oscar Isaac as Apocalypse. I know you did your best, dude, but Apocalypse is one of those characters that you just don't do him live action like that. I mean, at least use some CGI to create like a monstrous looking character, because he doesn't look like a dude in a rubber suit like this movie as much. He's so much bigger than that, in my opinion. You did your best, but the way it was written, there wasn't a whole lot for you to infuse into this to make it an amazing villain. Magneto still wins the crown for me on that one. And let me think if there's anything else. I mean, um, it's another one of those movies where it takes nods to the previous movies too, because you have a fight club and they're doing cage matches just like they had the fight club and the cage match with Wolverine in the first X-Men movie. So instead you get Angel and Nightcrawler, and it's like, okay, I get it, ha ha ha. But there's a certain amount of like, I've already seen these kind of things, let's do something different. And the different you get usually isn't something that's amazing. It's something where you feel like it's half-hearted at this point. I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way. On the scale of the three movies that I look at as the big summer, like superhero comic book movies so far, I'd say this is your mid-range one. It's not amazing. It's not ridiculously bad, but you definitely get the feeling of like comic book and superhero fatigue starting to happen here, because you're dealing with a franchise that's already established. There's not a whole lot of new to offer there, with the exception of what villains are going to go up against next. And it doesn't feel like Bryan Singer is willing to escape the template that he's already done to do something like they're going off into space and the Shi'ar Empire is in danger, or you know, like Corsair and the Starjammers come down and need the X-Men to help them with something. And they're also shooting down the idea that Corsair could actually be Cyclops' father, which that kind of bothered me too, because I always thought that was cool, where he's got this dad that's out there in space doing God knows what, gallivanting, and he's a pirate. And in this they show both Alex and Scott's mother and father, and you just kind of look at them going, well, I guess you guys are just the typical parents in this. That's awesome. There's no bigger mythology to tell with these characters. But yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired. Personally, I would like to see what they would do from the ground up with these movies. I'd love if Marvel could take them over and do the Marvel Universe take on these. Will that happen? I doubt it. I think you're going to have to pry X-Men away from Fox's cold, dead hands at this point. But there is a part of me that would absolutely love to see that happen at some point, and you know, see what they would do if they could do that. But anyway, long story short, since craziness is happening upstairs, that's my cue. So, not a fan, not gonna recommend it. If you go see it, more power to you, that's cool. But I'm curious to see what they do in the hands of someone other than Singer, and it doesn't look like they're taking that away from him either. So it is what it is. That being said, I guess that's the end of it. Hey, you know, tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. Tell me if you think this one is actually the better X-Men movie of the last decade or not. And, you know, tell me I'm right, tell me I'm wrong, whatever. I'm easygoing about this. We're in the age of fan entitlement, as a lot of things on the internet have been saying, and you know, you're entitled to your opinions, just don't go and make death threats with them. And hey, I'll catch you next time for another crazy review of something one way or the other, and more thoughts and opinions. And I hope you guys have a great weekend out there and enjoy something geek. Alright, catch you later. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe if you like what we've been doing so far. I know Jesse has been doing great with his pull lists, with the comics and whatnot. He's given me some ideas of things I want to be checking out, so I hope he's doing that for you guys too. And, you know, it's always cool we can talk about other things. We don't just talk movies, we talk comics, we're going to talk pop culture, whatever we can get in these little moments here and there online. So anyway, hey, catch you guys later. See ya.